As you can see, this by the setting, it's going to be a fairly sort of intimate sort of thing, interactive session. We're not really, even though we mentioned in the agenda that we're going to have panelists, but please to consider yourself as a panelist for all the sessions. So whatever. Um, Dr. Ijaz Nabi is with us. He's joining us virtually. He's going to give the opening sort of statements. I think Dr. Ijaz Nabi does not require an introduction, but just in case for somebody he does, let me just quickly read out a few lines of his intro. He's currently the country director for the International Growth Center Pakistan, IGC. He's also the executive director of CDPR, our partner in this workshop. That's a consortium of development policy research. He's also a professor of economics at LUMS, and he's worked for 22 years at the World Bank in various countries. He was also manager economic policy for the South Asia region. So he's been intimately involved. In fact, Ijaz and I go back to many economic advisory councils, we've been populating those for quite a while. But he's obviously has a much deeper sort of insight into the policy space. He's also published extensively on economic growth, investment and finance, industrialization, international trade, and labor markets in developing countries. So over to you, Ijaz.
Thank you, Saqib. That was a long and generous introduction. And indeed, we go back a long way. First of all, my apologies for not being there in person. I've injured my knee, and my doctor says I shouldn't travel for 3 weeks. Otherwise, I would have loved to be part of this discussion for the whole day. And I'll tell you why what you're discussing today is so important. And I'm sure Saqib will have many more even wiser things to say. Provinces now are really key to Pakistan's macroeconomic stability. And I'll tell you why. Pakistan's macroeconomic instability is caused by the fiscal deficit. Over and over again, we run into the balance of payments problem because of the fiscal deficit. Now, all fiscal deficits are not bad. India has a much larger fiscal deficit than we do. But along with the fiscal deficit, our ability to sustain that deficit has really shrunk because our international reserves have really gone down to the minimum levels. And that's because our exports are shrinking as a size of the economy, as a share of the economy. And taxation has a very important role, especially provincial taxes have a very important role in both raising revenue, but also leveling the playing field. A lot of the money, a lot of the investments that should be going into trade-related activity, especially export-related activity, are finding their way into real estate and retail. Both of these are in the realm of provincial governments. So provincial governments have a role to play not only in increasing the total size of revenues and thereby contributing to the reduction in fiscal deficit, but also in leveling the playing field by making sure that those economic activities that are attracting a lot of investment and are doing nothing for our exports face the same fiscal challenges that the other activities face, especially the exporters face. So on both counts, provincial taxation role is absolutely critical. So today's workshop, and I wish I could have been there for all the sessions, are extremely important. Now, how do provinces play that role, which is going to be the main thrust of the discussion today? The provinces can play that role on two counts. First of all, increasing the willingness to pay of those who fall within the domain of provincial taxes. And that means improving services, linking taxation with improvement in service delivery. We've seen this in the research that IGC has sponsored and others have sponsored how important it is, particularly in property taxes, that you improve the services, people's willingness to pay increases. And I can give you many examples from own local cooperative setups also, where people who are members of those cooperative are willing to pay more, provided they see the money being spent in improving services. So it's absolutely critical, and you have a wonderful session today where Dr. Mushtaba will talk about some of the lessons that we have learned from property taxes. In addition to that, there are other ways to enhance capacity, behavioral insights that will allow you to enhance provincial capacity to raise revenues, and a number of studies and sessions that you have today allow you to get an understanding of how you use nudges and other instruments for raising taxes. All of this because as the provinces increase their role in fiscal management of the economy, they will need to enhance capacity. And capacity can either be enhanced by recruiting more people or by being smart about the way you set up your tax administration. And that means that you look at some of the modern methods for getting taxpayers to pay their taxes. So the workshops are organized beautifully. I've looked at all of the sessions. I've been involved in the structuring of the sessions. I think there's a lot to learn, both from those who advise provincial governments as well as representatives of the provincial government. I just want to conclude by saying that provinces, we can no longer say that this is the federal responsibility, what happens on the macroeconomic balance sheet. Provinces have an equal role to play, both in terms of raising revenues, but also in terms of leveling the playing field between exporters and those who are putting money in real estate and in retail. Let me stop there and let me thank UKAID, the Adam Smith International, the SEED project, all of you who have come from the provinces, and also say that IGC is continuing to play an important role, because policy reform must be data-driven, must be evidence-driven, and that's the work IGC sponsors. So once again, thank you very much for this opportunity. I wish I'd been there in person, but I will keep close tabs on how the discussions go. Thank you, Saqib.
Thank you, Dr. Nabi. And sorry to hear about your knee. Quick recovery. It was amiss of me not to mention my colleague from SEED here, Dr. Omar Mukhtar. He's the team leader SEED. So SEED, obviously, along with CDPR and IGC, and with the collaboration of UKAID, have organized this. What I'll do is now, according to the agenda, I'll just set the context, some of the things which Dr. Nabi mentioned. I'll just talk about how the provinces can and need to step up. There's a short presentation. I think if you could load that, that'll be great. In the interim, I'd like to thank the chairman, Sindh Board of Revenue, and our colleagues from PRA and KPRA for making it here. Thank you so much. Right, thank you. So the fiscal context, as we all know, but it's worth sort of setting it in perspective, what we're going to say. So our overall fiscal framework is characterized by very low revenue collection, expenditure rigidity, and primarily this arises not just from the preemption of resources by debt servicing now. So I'll show you some slides on how that is sort of feeding into our revenues that we do collect. But as you're from the provinces, your concern would also be the pension liability, because that's really eating into the provincial resources in a big way. So there's expenditure rigidity, and then there's low and declining efficiency of public expenditure, which obviously makes things worse. There's an overall lack of alignment with our development framework, and the net result is the allocations do not translate into spending, and the spending does not translate into outcomes. So we have obviously a big problem, and this we'll talk about how this is leading to public debt accumulation as well. But if you look at Pakistan in the context of several other countries, the more relevant ones have been marked in dark, sort of green and olive, the middle income countries, the LDICs, and Pakistan is at 11.4, just ahead of Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. This is total revenue mobilization as a percentage of GDP. Um, so it's 11.4%. Now, because of this, and of course, the corollary has been that we've run very high fiscal deficits for a protracted period of time. So as a result, we've accumulated public debt, or we are accumulating public debt at an alarming pace. So obviously, it's been in the news as well, but this is something many of us have been saying for several years now, that the debt accumulation is completely unsustainable. And why? I'll show that to you in the next few slides. So if you look at public debt as a percentage of revenue, it's now at about 713%. To put this in context, the two ways to look at it: one is Pakistan, as you know, is rated triple C by Standard and Poor's. So if you look at the average for all triple C rated countries, which is obviously not a very nice place to be at, triple C, but even for that, the average is 350%. So public debt as a percentage of revenues for all triple C rated sovereigns is 350%. We're over twice that. And then the other context is that when we went for Paris Club rescheduling in 2001, our public debt at that point in time was 535% of GDP, right? So we've smashed our previous records as well. Now, if you look at the other part of it, which is really where the squeeze comes in, this is interest payments as percentage of net federal revenue. So what the federation collects from then what passes on through the federal divisible pool to the provinces, then it has to service debt out of the remaining. So out of that net federal revenue in 2023, 123%. So we are in a Ponzi game, really. I mean, it should have been much below 100%. It's over 100%. So we are actually borrowing now just to make our interest payments at the federal level, right? So the federal fiscal framework is in a Ponzi game now, unfortunately, right? I mean, I'm not saying this in it's a proper sort of term that I'm using. So we really need to consider how to increase our resource mobilization. Now, if you look at interest payments as a part of the budget, now these are from the federal budget, and this is understated because this is the budgetary numbers. Now we know, for example, that because the policy rate was kept at 22% for a long period of time, this is no longer the actual situation for interest payments, right? Interest payments are at least 1.2 trillion rupees higher than what we had budgeted at the federal level. But even then, they were eating away 51% of the total expenditure. Interest payments are now well over 51%. And if you look at the actual numbers that will come out in 24, for fiscal year 2024, they'll be closer to about 57 to 58%. Now, the problem is that, a lot of people sort of focus on that Pakistan actually spends more than it should. Now, there's a paradox there. We actually spend on many of the things that we should not be spending on, and we do not have public sector spending efficiency, like we mentioned earlier. But the financing requirement is far larger than what we're actually spending, right? Because we're underspending on health, we're underspending on education, we're underspending on even maintaining our public assets, which is not included here, for example. To some extent it is, but in roads and electricity, but we're actually underspending on even maintaining the public capital stock. So according to the IMF, we need to spend at least about 16% of GDP more than we're spending currently. So really, the size of the scale of the challenge is really clear now, right? Now, the caveat is that in the previous slide, they've not included, right? The pension liability, they've not included our climate resilience spending, which over the next 10 years till 2030, the World Bank estimates that we need to spend an additional $350 billion. So this is not included in that. Then there are contingencies. and I'm not just talking about the, sort of the military sort of contingencies. There are other contingencies through flooding and natural disasters that we have to spend, and the contingent liabilities that are not included here. So the overall effect is that we're completely understating our revenue requirement. Right? It's far, far larger than we tend to think. Now, okay, thank you. So this is where the provinces really come in, right? I know that all of you know what the situation is. It's but I'm just going to sort of set the context um, of the provincial sort of contribution. Um, so as we know that there are substantial tax bases. In fact, some of our largest tax bases are in the provincial domain. The three of them here are the urban immovable property, sales tax and services, and agriculture income. The estimated revenue potential, and I've done some work on this, IGC has done a lot of work on this, and many others. The estimated revenue potential is around 2 to 3% of GDP for provincial tax collection. And the actual collection is actually, we've rounded off to 1%, it's slightly less than 1%. Right, so I'll talk about that a bit later. So really, the tax effort by provinces needs to improve very significantly. Now, if you look at the provincial contribution, it's about 0.96% of GDP, so just about 1%, and it's been static there for a long period of time, roughly between 1 to 1.4%. And in terms of the overall revenue collection, provinces are contributing less than 10%. Right? So really, I think this is considering their revenue potential as well. This is an underwhelming sort of performance. Now, if you look at the province's own expenditures, right, how much of them are they meeting by their own source revenue? It's only about 16%. Now, this is clearly even the test of fiscal self-sufficiency is not being met. Right? Now, what can be done about this? Obviously, we'll talk about that. That's what the whole workshop is organized around. So there's some of the pathways to revenue mobilization are a greater tax effort, of course, especially with UIPT, increasing the C efficiency of sales tax and services. And it's not very clear here, but I've actually, in the my original presentation, I'd used a lighter shade for agriculture income, because personally, I think even though on paper agriculture income, according to the IMF and the World Bank, has a large revenue potential, it's a very hard to collect tax for the provinces, especially given the fragmented nature of our landholding, right? So I'm not sort of really putting that on the table, that it's something that we can, the next 2-3 years, we can really sort of get a lot from. But the other two, we can really milk much more than we are currently. Then there's digital transformation. There's tax administration reform. And all these things are going to be talked about. So we have Mansoor Sultan Saab here with us. We'll talk about digital transformation, and sort of in the overall context of tax administration reform. We have Dr. Sherif Khan will talk about some of the things that we need to do. Then we have Dr. Mujtaba talking about beneficial taxation later on. Of course, there's some things which are not in the domain of the provinces, but are in the domain of the overall federation, and that is improved harmonization and better coordination between the center. And the data sharing is really important, because I think one of the things that ultimately we want to move to, and something that I've been sort of a part of, an effort that I've been a part of since 2008 or 9, is when we talked about Dr. Hisham Ahmed, myself, Dr. Ijaz, talking about moving to an integrated sales tax. Both goods and services. That's really the ambition. Now, I know it may not be something the provinces are very keen about, but really, if you want to enhance the utility of the data that you get from a VAT, really the VAT is not initially about revenues. It's about the data, because when you match the income tax to the sales tax, that's how you can do it, through the VAT. And the VAT also closes the loops on documentation. So really, getting VAT right is really important. But there are other pathways, of course, and we'll talk about beneficial taxation. We'll talk about the incentives framework for tax administrators, and what we've done a lot of work over the past 3-4 years at SEED, which is the behavioral insights. Let me just quickly talk about 2 slides on this, because KP is the first sort of subnational entity in the global south, which has set up a policy nudge unit. We did that in 2021 in collaboration with Qatar's Behavior Before Development, B4D. Unfortunately, that's been disbanded now. So the Mind Lab, this is what it's called. It's been set up in KP. We've conducted one RCT. Some others are in the pipeline, and we are helped, tremendously by our colleagues from IGC and LUMS while doing that. What we find from the international experience is that there's a lot of promise to the RCT work that's going on there. So this is two sort of international experiences with RCTs. One is from the Dominican Republic, where there was an increase, a very noticeable sort of increase of about $100 million in the relatively small sort of revenue base. About $200 million for the Dominican Republic using nudges. And then one from Indonesia. Of course, these are just two sort of examples from a really large variety of examples now, where RCTs have been sort of employed successfully for tax compliance, for tax enforcement. And by the way, in the region now, it's Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, they all have policy nudge units. A lot of them are focusing on citizen compliance generally, but the first bit of work that they're all doing is on tax compliance. So we really think this is something that we can work on. So I'll stop here. That's the context. Thank you.